Growing up in the Morrison household meant understanding one fundamental truth. There was Daniel, and then there was everyone else. I was 7 when I first realized I was invisible. It was Daniel's 10th birthday party, and our backyard was filled with neighbors, relatives, and half his class. Mom had spent weeks planning it. Superhero theme, custom cake, a magician, the works. I remember sitting on the porch steps, watching her fuss over every detail, making sure Daniel's special day was absolutely perfect. "Sweetie, can you move?" she said, stepping around me with a tray of sandwiches. "I need to get these to the table." I wasn't in her way. There was plenty of room. But I moved anyway because that's what you do when you're the spare child. You make yourself smaller. The magician was pulling rabbits out of hats when Dad called everyone over for the cake ceremony. 23 people gathered around Daniel as he stood behind his 3-tier superhero cake, grinning that perfect smile that made adults melt. "Speech, speech," Uncle Mike called out, and everyone laughed. Daniel, ever the performer, cleared his throat dramatically. "Thank you everyone for coming to celebrate with me. I'm so grateful for my amazing family and friends, and I promise to use my new bike responsibly." Applause erupted. Mom wiped away a tear. Dad beamed with pride. "That's my boy," Dad announced to the crowd. 10 years old and already more mature than most adults. "We're so proud of you, son." I was standing right there. Right fucking there. But when Dad said "my boy," when he talked about being proud of his son, his eyes never even flickered in my direction. That night, after the guests left and the decorations came down, I helped Mom clean up the backyard. We worked in silence, picking up paper plates and deflated balloons. "Mom," I finally asked, "when's my birthday party going to be?" She paused, holding a handful of streamers. "Oh honey, your birthday isn't until November. That's months away." "But will it be like Daniel's with the magician and the cake and everyone?" Mom's smile was tired. "We'll see, sweetheart. November is expensive with Christmas coming up. We might do something smaller this year." Smaller. Always smaller. November came, and my 8th birthday was celebrated with a store-bought cake and dinner at Applebee's, just the 4 of us. No friends, no decorations, no magician. Daniel got bored halfway through and spent the rest of the evening playing games on Dad's phone. But here's the thing about being invisible. You develop other skills. You learn to watch. You learn to listen. You learn to remember every slight, every forgotten moment, every time you were pushed aside for the golden child. By the time I was 12, I had a mental catalog of every achievement Daniel received praise for. Every time my parents bragged about him to their friends. Every moment they looked at him like he hung the moon. Daniel made honor roll. Dad took him out for ice cream and posted about it on Facebook. I made honor roll the same semester. "That's nice, honey. Can you set the table?" Daniel scored the winning goal in soccer. The whole family went out to celebrate, and Mom called Grandma to share the news. I won the school science fair. "Great job. Did you remember to feed the dog?" The pattern was so consistent it became predictable. Daniel was the star, the pride, the future. I was the afterthought, the backup plan, the one who would probably turn out just fine. High school made it worse. Daniel was student body president, captain of the debate team, and had a 4.0 GPA. College recruiters started calling the house when he was a junior. Our kitchen counter was covered with acceptance letters from prestigious universities. I was getting decent grades, playing JV basketball, and trying to figure out who I was supposed to be when your entire identity is Daniel's younger brother. "You, no," Mom said one evening during Daniel's senior year. "I think Daniel might actually get into Harvard. Can you imagine? Our son at Harvard. Our son." Singular. I was sitting right there at the dinner table, but the conversation flowed around me like I was furniture. Dad talked about Daniel's bright future. Mom worried about how much they'd miss him, and Daniel basked in the attention, like a plant in sunlight. "What about you?" Daniel asked suddenly, turning to me. "What colleges are you thinking about?" The question caught me off guard. It was the first time anyone had asked about my future in months. I don't know, I said. Honestly. Maybe state or community college first. The silence that followed was deafening. Not disappointed silence, that would have implied they had expectations to be disappointed. This was indifferent silence. The kind that says, well, someone has to be average. That's practical, Mom said finally, which was her polite way of saying realistic for someone like you. Daniel did get into Harvard, full scholarship. The day the acceptance letter arrived, Dad actually cried. He called in sick to work so he could drive Daniel around town, showing off the letter to anyone who would look. I got into state. In-state tuition, decent programs, nothing spectacular. When my acceptance letter came, Mom stuck it on the refrigerator, next to a grocery list and Daniel's Harvard letter. The contrast was everything you needed to know about our family dynamics. But here's what they didn't understand about the invisible child. I was paying attention to everything. Every conversation, every achievement, every moment they chose Daniel over me. I was building a catalog of resentment, and someday, when the opportunity presented itself, I was going to use every single entry. The night before Daniel left for Harvard, Dad pulled him aside for one of their man-to-man talks. I could hear them from my room, Dad's voice thick with emotion as he told Daniel how proud he was, how much potential he had, how he was going to change the world. I never got a man-to-man talk. I got reminders to take out the trash and questions about whether I'd done my homework. As I lay in bed that night listening to my parents fuss over Daniel's packing, I made myself a promise. Someday, the golden child was going to fall, and when he did, I was going to be the one pushing. I just had to wait for the right moment. 20 years later, that moment finally came. Daniel thrived at Harvard like he was born for it. Every phone call home was a highlight reel. Dean's list, research opportunities with professors whose names I'd never heard but Mom and Dad repeated like prayers. Internships at companies that made our parents' eyes widen with recognition and pride. Daniel's working with a startup this summer, Mom would tell the neighbors. They're developing some kind of revolutionary app. His professor recommended him personally. I was working at a local electronics store, learning how to fix phones and tablets. Useful skills, decent money, but nothing that made anyone's eyes light up. "That's nice, honey," was all Mom said when I told her I'd been promoted to assistant manager. The phone calls became a weekly ritual I learned to dread. Every Sunday at 6 p.m., Daniel would call, and the entire family would gather around. The speakerphone like he was broadcasting from space. "I'm thinking about double majoring," Daniel announced during his sophomore year. "Computer science and business. Professor Chen thinks I have real potential in tech entrepreneurship." "That's incredible," Dad practically shouted. "You hear that? Tech entrepreneurship. Our boy's going to be the next Steve Jobs." I was sitting right there, but they talked about Daniel like he was the only child they'd ever had. "What about you?" Daniel asked, remembering I existed. "How's community college going?" I'd transferred to state after 2 years at community college. Better late than never, right? But somehow in the retelling it always came back to those 2 years at community college, like that's where I belonged. "It's fine," I said. "I'm majoring in information systems." "Oh, that's practical," Daniel said, using Mom's favorite word for my life choices. Practical. The word that meant good enough for someone like you. But here's what they didn't know. I was getting really, really good at information systems. Not just the coursework. I was diving deep into cybersecurity, data analysis, network architecture. While Daniel was learning theory at Harvard, I was learning how things actually worked. I was learning how to find information, how to access systems, how to understand the digital footprints people leave behind. Skills that would prove very useful later. Junior year, Daniel started talking about his big idea. Some kind of platform that would revolutionize how small businesses manage their operations. He was working on it with 2 classmates, and according to him, it was going to change everything. "We're calling it Streamline HQ," he said during one of those Sunday calls. "We've already got interest from 3 potential investors." Dad nearly fell off his chair. "Investors? You mean like Shark Tank?" Better than Shark Tank, Dad? These are real venture capitalists. Harvard connections. If this works out, I might not even need to finish my degree. The silence that followed was reverent. Their golden boy was going to be a college dropout billionaire, just like Bill Gates and Mark Zuckerberg. "We're so proud of you," Mom whispered, and I could hear her crying. I was finishing my degree at State, working part-time, and learning everything I could about digital security, but nobody was crying proud tears over my achievements. That summer, Daniel came home for 2 weeks between his internship and some entrepreneurship program at Harvard. He spent most of his time in his old room, working on his laptop, taking calls with his co-founders and potential investors. I was curious about this world-changing idea, so I did what invisible children do best. I watched and listened. Daniel wasn't particularly careful about digital security. He used the same password for everything, his middle name and birth, year. He left his laptop open when he went to grab food. He took those important calls on speakerphone when he thought nobody was around. I started piecing together what Streamline HQ actually was. It was a decent idea, a dashboard that would help small businesses track inventory, manage customer relationships, and handle basic accounting all in one place. Not revolutionary, but solid. There was definitely a market for it. More importantly, I started understanding how Daniel worked. He was the face of the operation, the Harvard name that opened doors. But the real technical work was being done by his partners. Daniel was good at presentations and networking, but his coding skills were adequate at best. "You should see him work," Mom told Mrs. Peterson from next door. 18 hours a day sometimes. He's so dedicated. What I saw was Daniel spending most of his time on calls, talking about the business rather than building it. But perception was everything in our house, and Daniel had always been a master of perception. Senior year arrived, and with it came the news we'd all been waiting for. Streamline HQ had been accepted into Harvard's prestigious Startup Accelerator program. More than that, they were finalists for the university's annual Innovation Challenge, a competition with a $50,000 grand prize and guaranteed meetings with top-tier investors. "This is it," Daniel said during what would be our last family Sunday call before the competition. 5 years of work, and it all comes down to this presentation. If we win, we're looking at Series A funding within 6 months. Dad was practically vibrating with excitement. "When's the presentation?" "March 15th. It's going to be live-streamed too, so you can all watch your boy make history." Your boy. Always your boy. After the call ended, I went to my room and opened my laptop. March 15th was still 3 months away. 3 months to watch, to learn, to understand exactly how Daniel's 5 years of work was actually structured. 3 months to find the cracks in the golden child's armor. I started small. Social media monitoring, public record searches, basic digital reconnaissance. All perfectly legal, all using skills I'd learned in my practical degree program. What I found was interesting. Streamline HQ wasn't just Daniel's idea. It was primarily built by his 2 partners, Marcus Chen and Sarah Williams. Daniel was listed as CEO, but Marcus was the lead developer and Sarah handled all the business operations. Daniel's main contribution seemed to be his Harvard connections and his natural charisma. But here's the thing about charismatic leaders. They often take credit for other people's work. And when you dig deep enough, you can usually find evidence of that. I spent the next 2 months learning everything I could about Streamline HQ, about Daniel's partners, about the Innovation Challenge itself. I studied their code repository, their business plan, their investor presentations. And slowly, carefully, I started to see the opportunities. The thing about being invisible is that people don't notice when you're paying attention. They don't realize that the quiet kid in the corner is cataloging every weakness, every vulnerability, every moment of carelessness. Daniel had spent 20 years being the golden child, the favorite, the one who could do no wrong. He'd gotten comfortable with success, confident that things would always work out in his favor. He'd forgotten that invisible children grow up to be very, very patient adults. And patience, as it turns out, is a superpower when you're planning revenge. 2 weeks before the Innovation Challenge, I finally found what I was looking for. A small crack in Daniel's perfect facade. Nothing illegal. Nothing that would hurt his partners, but something that would ensure the golden child finally experienced what it felt like to lose. For the first time in my life, I was going to be better than Daniel at something. I was going to be better at being ruthless. The crack in Daniel's armor was smaller than I'd hoped, but it was enough. Streamline HQ's code repository was hosted on a private GitHub account that Daniel managed. Nothing unusual there. Most startups keep their code private during development, but Daniel had made one crucial mistake. He'd connected his personal email account to the repository for notifications, and that personal email used the same password as everything else in his digital life. I didn't hack anything. I didn't break any laws. I simply used information that Daniel had carelessly left accessible, combined with social engineering techniques I'd learned in my cybersecurity courses. The repository showed the real story of Streamline HQ's development. Marcus Chen had written 73% of the code base. Sarah Williams had developed the entire business model, market analysis, and financial projections. Daniel's contributions were primarily cosmetic, user interface tweaks, presentation materials, and marketing copy. But that wasn't the smoking gun. The smoking gun was buried in the commit history. 3 months earlier, Marcus had uploaded a complete working prototype of the core algorithm, the heart of Streamline HQ's competitive advantage. The timestamp showed 2:47 a.m. on a Tuesday. The commit message was simple: Core Algorithm v2.0, ready for testing. 2 days later, Daniel had uploaded his own version of the same algorithm with minor modifications. His commit message read, Optimized Core Algorithm, significant performance improvements. The code was 94% identical. Daniel had taken Marcus's work, made superficial changes, and claimed credit for significant improvements. In the startup world, this kind of thing happens all the time. Team members build on each other's work, and the lines of individual contribution get blurred. But the Innovation Challenge had specific rules about individual contributions and intellectual property ownership. More importantly, I'd found email exchanges between Daniel and the competition organizers where he explicitly claimed to be the primary developer of the core technology. That was a lie, a documented, provable lie. But I couldn't just expose Daniel directly. That would be too obvious, too traceable back to me. I needed something more elegant, more devastating. I needed Daniel to destroy himself. The plan I developed was beautiful in its simplicity. I would create a situation where Daniel's lies would be exposed naturally, during the competition itself, in front of the judges, the investors, and the live stream audience. I started by creating an anonymous email account and reaching out to Marcus Chen directly. Not to expose Daniel, that would have seemed suspicious coming from a stranger. Instead, I posed as a tech journalist writing a piece about student entrepreneurs at Harvard. I'm particularly interested in the technical innovation behind Streamline HQ, I wrote. Would you be available for a brief interview about the development process? Marcus was eager to talk. Most developers love explaining their work, especially when someone shows genuine interest in the technical details. Over the course of 3 email exchanges, I got him to explain the entire architecture of the system, including the specific challenges he'd solved in developing the core algorithm. I recorded our phone interview with his permission, telling him it was for accuracy in my article. What I really wanted was Marcus, in his own words, explaining how he developed the technology that Daniel was claiming as his own innovation. The next phase was more delicate. I needed to ensure that during the Innovation Challenge presentation, Daniel would be asked specific technical questions that would expose his lack of deep knowledge about the system he claimed to have built. This required understanding the judges. The Innovation Challenge panel consisted of 5 people, 2 Harvard professors, 2 venture capitalists, and 1 successful entrepreneur who'd graduated from the program 5 years earlier. I researched each of them extensively, learning their backgrounds, their investment focuses, and most importantly, their pet peeves. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, computer science professor, had written extensively about the importance of technical founders in startup success. She was known for asking detailed technical questions during presentations. Michael Rodriguez, venture capitalist, had a reputation for being skeptical of business guy CEOs who couldn't explain their own technology. Perfect. I created a second anonymous email account and sent each judge a carefully crafted message, posing as a concerned Harvard student who'd heard rumors about plagiarism in some of the Innovation Challenge submissions. I don't want to make false accusations, I wrote, but I think it would be valuable if the judges ask detailed technical questions about the development process. Some teams might be misrepresenting individual contributions. I didn't mention Daniel or Streamline HQ specifically. I just planted the seed that technical competency should be thoroughly tested. The final piece of the plan was the most elegant. I needed Daniel to be overconfident, to walk into that presentation believing he could handle any question thrown at him. So I helped him prepare. I called Daniel 2 weeks before the competition, using the excuse that I wanted to understand his business better. I'm thinking about starting my own tech company, I lied. Could you walk me through how Streamline HQ works? Daniel was thrilled to explain. For 30 minutes, he gave me his polished presentation, full of buzzwords and high-level concepts, but light on technical details. That's incredible, I said when he finished. You really built all of this yourself? Well, I had help with some of the coding, Daniel admitted. But the core innovation, the algorithm that makes it all work, that was my breakthrough. Wow. You must really understand the technical side then. Absolutely. I could code this entire system from scratch if I had to. That was the moment I knew my plan would work. Daniel had convinced himself of his own lie. He genuinely believed he could handle any technical question because he'd been living in the bubble of his own mythology for so long. You know what? I said. You should definitely emphasize the technical innovation during your presentation. That's what's going to set you apart from the other teams. You think so? Definitely. The judges are going to want to know that you're not just a business guy with a good idea. They want to invest in technical founders who really understand their technology. I was feeding him rope and he was eagerly tying the noose. The week before the competition, I made one final preparation. I contacted a local tech blog and pitched them a story about the Innovation Challenge, specifically focusing on the technical innovations being presented. I think there's a great human interest angle here, I told the editor. Young entrepreneurs solving real problems with cutting-edge technology. I'd love to do follow-up interviews with the winners about their development process. The editor loved the idea. They agreed to attend the live stream and publish a detailed technical analysis of the winning presentations. Everything was in place. Daniel would walk into that presentation confident in his ability to handle any question. The judges would be primed to ask detailed technical questions. Marcus Chen's recorded interview explaining his actual development process would be ready to publish if needed. And I would be watching from my apartment, finally seeing the golden child experience what it felt like to fail in front of everyone who mattered. 20 years of being invisible, of being the afterthought, of watching Daniel bask in praise for achievements that weren't entirely his own. 20 years of "That's practical" and Daniel's younger brother, and being forgotten at my own birthday dinner. It was all about to end. March 15th was 5 days away, and I had never been more excited about anything in my entire life. March 15th arrived with the kind of crisp Boston morning that makes everything feel possible. I'd taken the day off work, telling my manager I had a family emergency, which wasn't technically a lie. I was about to create one. The Innovation Challenge was scheduled to begin at 2 p.m. Eastern, with 5 finalist teams presenting in order of their preliminary scores. Streamline HQ was presenting fourth, which meant Daniel would have time to watch the other presentations and get comfortable before his moment in the spotlight. I'd set up my laptop in my living room with multiple browser windows open. The official, live stream, Twitter feeds from tech journalists covering the event, and a secure connection to monitor any real-time discussions about the presentations. At 1:45 p.m., my phone buzzed with a text from Mom. Watching Daniel's big moment, so proud. I didn't respond. The first 3 presentations went smoothly. Standard startup pitches, Problem identification, solution overview, market analysis, financial projections. The judges asked typical questions about customer acquisition, competitive landscape, and scalability. Then it was Daniel's turn. He walked onto the stage looking every inch the Harvard Golden Boy. Perfectly tailored navy suit, confident smile, the kind of presence that made people want to believe in him. For a moment, I almost felt bad about what was coming. Almost. "Good afternoon," Daniel began, his voice carrying that natural charisma that had charmed teachers, coaches, and parents his entire life. "I'm Daniel Morrison, CEO and founder of Streamline HQ. Founder, not co-founder. Founder." The first 10 minutes of his presentation were flawless. Daniel explained the problem: small businesses struggling with fragmented management systems. He outlined Streamline HQ's solution, an integrated platform that unified inventory, customer relations, and accounting. He presented market research, showing a $12 billion addressable market. The judges were nodding. The audience was engaged. Daniel was in his element. Then came the questions. "Impressive presentation," said Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the computer science professor. "Can you walk us through the technical architecture of your core algorithm?" I leaned forward in my chair. Daniel's smile never wavered. "Absolutely. The core algorithm utilizes machine learning principles to optimize data flow between different business modules. We've implemented a proprietary neural network that learns from user behavior patterns to predict inventory needs and customer preferences." Buzzword soup. Impressive sounding, but completely meaningless. Dr. Walsh wasn't satisfied. "That's a high-level overview. I'm interested in the specific implementation. What machine learning framework did you use? How did you handle the training? Data requirements?" Daniel's pause was barely noticeable, but I caught it. "We built our own framework, actually. Custom designed for our specific use case. The training data comes from anonymized user interactions across the platform." "Interesting," Dr. Walsh said, making notes. "And you developed this framework yourself?" "The core innovation was mine, yes. I had some help with implementation details, but the fundamental breakthrough, that was my contribution." Michael Rodriguez, the venture capitalist, jumped in. "That's quite an achievement for an undergraduate. Most companies spend millions developing custom ML frameworks. Can you explain the specific advantage your approach has over existing solutions, like TensorFlow or PyTorch?" This was the moment. Daniel was trapped between admitting he'd lied about developing the technology himself or continuing to dig deeper into technical details he clearly didn't understand. He chose to dig deeper. "Our approach is fundamentally different," Daniel said, his confidence beginning to show hairline cracks. "Instead of using traditional neural network architectures, we developed a hybrid system that combines decision trees with clustering algorithms to create more accurate predictions." Dr. Walsh and Michael Rodriguez exchanged glances. What Daniel had just described was not only technically nonsensical, it was the kind of mistake that proved he didn't understand the basics of machine learning. "I'm sorry," Dr. Walsh said, "but that doesn't make technical sense. Decision trees and clustering algorithms serve completely different purposes. You can't just combine them in the way you're describing." The room went silent. Daniel's face flushed red, but he pressed on. "Well, obviously I'm simplifying for a general audience. The actual implementation is much more complex." "I have a PhD in computer science," Dr. Walsh replied coldly. "I think I can handle the complexity." The livestream chat was exploding. Tech journalists were tweeting in real time. I could see comments like, "This guy has no idea what he's talking about," and classic business student trying to sound technical. Michael Rodriguez leaned forward. "Let me ask a different question. You mentioned this was 5 years of work. Can you walk us through your development timeline? When did you first start coding the platform?" Another trap. If Daniel claimed he'd been coding for 5 years, it would be easy to verify that he'd only learned basic programming in the last 2 years. If he admitted he hadn't done the coding himself, it would contradict everything he'd just claimed about developing the core algorithm. "I started with the conceptual framework 5 years ago," Daniel said carefully. The actual coding began about 2 years ago when I brought on technical co-founders to help implement my vision. So Marcus Chen and Sarah Williams helped implement your vision? Rodriguez pressed. Exactly. I provided the technical specifications and they helped bring it to life. Dr. Walsh looked at her notes. That's interesting because I actually spoke with Marcus Chen yesterday. He described the core algorithm as his own innovation, developed independently and then integrated into your platform. He seemed quite proud of solving what he called a really challenging optimization problem that had been stumping the team for months. The color drained from Daniel's face. I think there might be some miscommunication there, he said weakly. Marcus is being modest. The breakthrough came from our collaborative process, but the original insight was mine. Really? Dr. Walsh pulled out her phone. Because I have a recording of our conversation where Marcus explains in detail how he developed the algorithm after weeks of independent research. He even mentions that you weren't involved in the technical development at all, that your role was focused on business development and user interface design. The room was dead silent. The live stream chat had turned into a feeding frenzy. I could see my parents' faces in my mind, watching their golden boy crumble in real time. Daniel tried one last, desperate play. I think there's been a misunderstanding about roles and contributions. Obviously, in a collaborative environment, Mr. Morrison, Michael Rodriguez interrupted, are you telling us that you misrepresented your technical contributions in your application materials? No, because claiming to be the primary developer of technology you didn't actually develop would be grounds for immediate disqualification from this competition. Daniel stood there, trapped with nowhere to go. The confident Harvard golden boy had been replaced by a stammering fraud, exposed in front of hundreds of viewers and the people whose opinions mattered most to his future. I think we've heard enough, Dr. Sue, Walsh said. Thank you for your time, Mr. Morrison. Daniel walked off the stage in silence. No applause, no congratulations, no proud tears from the audience. Just the sound of 20 years of golden child mythology crashing down in real time. I closed my laptop and sat back in my chair, feeling something I'd never experienced before. The satisfaction of watching the favorite child finally lose. My phone was buzzing with texts from my parents, but I ignored them. They could process their disappointment on their own time. For the first time in my life, I had won something that Daniel had lost, and it felt absolutely perfect. The silence after Daniel walked off stage was thick, suffocating. It was broken only by the low murmurs of the audience and the frantic typing of journalists in the live stream chat. I watched the screen, a smug satisfaction spreading through me. The golden child was tarnished. My phone, which I'd left on silent, was now vibrating incessantly. Calls from mom and dad. Text messages that probably contained strings of exclamation points and desperate questions. I ignored them all. This wasn't about them, not yet. This was about watching Daniel's world implode in excruciating detail. The next team presented, but no one was truly paying attention. The atmosphere in the virtual room was palpably different. The air was thick with the lingering stench of exposed fraud. The judges, particularly Dr. Walsh and Michael Rodriguez, looked grim, their pens poised for questions that felt more like interrogations. Finally, the host stepped forward, a forced smile plastered on his face. Thank you to all our amazing finalists for their innovative presentations. The judges will now convene to make their final decision. We'll announce the winner in approximately 15 minutes. 15 minutes. Enough time for Daniel to suffer. I opened my web browser and navigated to a few prominent tech news sites. The headlines were already screaming. Harvard Innovation Challenge rocked by technical misunderstanding. Streamline HQ CEO stumbles under questioning, concerns raised. About IP claims. Is Harvard's golden boy a fraud? Debate ignites after disastrous presentation. Social media was a firestorm. Twitter, LinkedIn, tech forums. Everyone was dissecting Daniel's performance. Screenshots of Dr. Walsh's stern face, quotes of Daniel's stumbling answers, even animated GIFs of his deer-in-headlights look. And then, a direct message on an anonymous forum I frequented. Did you see that? Daniel Morrison just got roasted alive. He literally claimed someone else's IP. What a snake. I smiled. My seeds had blossomed into a full-blown inferno. The 15 minutes felt like an eternity for Daniel, but for me, it was a rapid-fire confirmation of everything I had set in motion. The narrative was shifting. The golden boy was becoming a pariah. When the host returned to the stage, his voice was unusually solemn. "Ladies and gentlemen, the judges have reached a decision." He cleared his throat. Due to unforeseen circumstances and significant concerns raised during the Q&A session regarding intellectual property ownership and technical contributions, the judges have unanimously decided to disqualify Streamline HQ from the Harvard Innovation Challenge. A gasp rippled through the virtual audience. Disqualification, not just a loss but a public humiliating disqualification. This was far better than I could have ever dreamed. The winner of the 2024 Harvard Innovation Challenge and recipient of the $50,000 grand prize is Team Nova for their groundbreaking work in sustainable energy solutions. Applause. A muted but respectful roar. The cameras cut to the winning team, a group of earnest-looking engineers celebrating quietly. But my eyes remained fixed on Daniel's former slot, the empty space on the screen where the next future billionaire was supposed to be. It was empty, a void, just like the one I'd felt for years. My phone began ringing again, an insistent, desperate ring. It was Dad. I decided to answer. I needed to witness their shock firsthand. "Alex, did you see it? What happened?" Daniel was he was terrible. They disqualified him. Dad's voice was frantic, laced with disbelief. "Dad, calm down. What are you talking about?" I feigned ignorance. Perfectly. The Innovation Challenge. Daniel's presentation. He completely blew it. And then they announced he was disqualified. Disqualified, Alex? What does that even mean? Disqualified? Wow, that's rough. I just caught the end of it. He seemed a little off during the Q&A. Off? He looked like he'd never seen a computer before. And that professor, Dr. Walsh, she just tore him apart. She said something about his partner, Marcus. Is Daniel lying about something? Dad, I have no idea. I mean, Daniel always talks about his vision and his ideas, but I don't really know much about the technical stuff. You know that's more my area. I injected a subtle hint of my own expertise, a quiet reminder of my practical skills that they had always dismissed. But this is Daniel, our Daniel. He's always been so brilliant, so perfect. Well, Dad, maybe even perfect people make mistakes. Or maybe they just get caught. A beat of silence on the other end. My subtle insinuation landed. Dad's mind, reeling from the public failure of his golden boy, was already searching for explanations for blame, and I was giving him a convenient, albeit false one. I need to call him, Dad mumbled, his voice distant. Your mother's beside herself. Good luck, Dad. It sounds like he's going to need it. I hung up, a slow smile spreading across my face. The first domino had fallen, and it had taken down everything in its path. Over the next few days, the fallout was relentless. Harvard issued a carefully worded statement about upholding academic integrity and the importance of original contributions. Streamline HQ's other co-founders, Marcus Chen and Sarah Williams, released their own statement, expressing disappointment but affirming their commitment to the project, subtly distancing themselves from Daniel. They didn't explicitly accuse him of anything, but the implication was clear. The project would continue just without its CEO. The $50,000 prize went to Team Nova. The venture capitalists who had shown interest in Streamline HQ publicly withdrew their offers. Daniel's name became synonymous with disqualified and unethical in the tech startup world. I didn't reach out to Daniel directly. I didn't need to. I watched him from afar through the whispers of family friends, the concerned calls from Mom, and the occasional, fleeting social media update. He shut down his LinkedIn profile, deleted his active presence on Twitter. His perfect curated online persona, the one that had broadcast his brilliance for years, simply vanished. Mom and Dad were a wreck. They spent hours on the phone with Daniel, trying to console him, trying to understand what went wrong. But how could they understand something that was so carefully orchestrated? He says it was a misunderstanding, Mom told me, her voice heavy with worry. He says he just misspoke, that the judges were too harsh. Maybe he did, I said noncommittally. Or maybe he just got caught exaggerating his role. I loved the ambiguity. It allowed them to cling to a glimmer of hope for Daniel while simultaneously planting the seed of doubt that would eventually corrode their unwavering faith in him. The parents of the golden child were finally seeing cracks in his golden facade, and the more they looked, the more cracks they would find. I felt a lightness I hadn't known was possible. The weight of 20 years of being secondary, of being overlooked, was beginning to lift. I had finally found a way to level the playing field, not by elevating myself, but by bringing Daniel down, to my level, or perhaps even lower. This wasn't just about winning, this was about making him lose, and he was losing spectacularly. The months that followed were a masterclass in slow, agonizing unraveling. For Daniel, at least. For me, they were glorious. First, the academic repercussions. Harvard, a university built on its reputation for producing the best and brightest, didn't take kindly to public embarrassment. Daniel wasn't expelled, but he was put on academic probation, and his entrepreneurship track was quietly suspended. His dream of skipping his final semester to launch Streamline HQ was dead. He would graduate, but with a cloud hanging over his name, a scarlet letter in the form of a public disqualification. Mom and Dad tried to spin it. At least he's finishing. His degree, that's what matters. But I could hear the hollowness in their voices. The pride, once boundless, was now laced with a bitter disappointment they couldn't fully conceal. Then came the professional fallout. Streamline HQ officially dissolved its partnership with Daniel. Marcus and Sarah, his co-founders, decided to rebrand and relaunch their core technology without him. They issued a polite statement about creative differences and a desire to move in a different direction. But everyone in the know understood. Daniel was radioactive. The venture capitalist who had once courted him now wouldn't return his calls. The mentorship program he was supposed to join evaporated. His once glowing LinkedIn profile, once a testament to his meteoric rise, remained deleted. His name became a cautionary tale whispered in startup circles. Don't be a Daniel Morrison. He moved back home for a few weeks after graduation, trying to figure things out. The golden boy, reduced to living in his childhood bedroom, scrolling aimlessly on his phone, a shadow of his former self. The dynamic in the house shifted subtly. Mom and Dad still worried about him, but the boundless admiration was replaced by an almost clinical concern. They saw his despondency, his lack of direction, and it confused them. They were used to Daniel being the solution, not the problem. He just seemed so lost, Mom confided in me one afternoon, almost as if seeking my advice. He doesn't want to talk about it, he just sits in his room. It's a big blow, Mom, I said, careful to sound sympathetic. He's never really experienced failure before, has he? It must be a shock to his system. The implication was clear. Daniel was soft. He couldn't handle real adversity. Unlike me, who had navigated life with far less fanfare, far more practical hurdles. Dad, too, started looking at me differently, not with the same blinding pride he reserved for Daniel, but with a new kind of acknowledgement. You know, Alex, he said one evening, you've always been so steady, so grounded. Daniel could learn a thing or two from you about resilience. I fought to keep the triumphant smirk off my face. This was it, the shifting sands of their approval. They weren't showering me with praise, not yet, but they were finally seeing me, not just as Daniel's brother, but as a person capable of enduring, capable of succeeding, even when Daniel couldn't. Daniel, meanwhile, tried to get back on his feet. He applied for jobs, but his resume, once impeccable, now had a glaring, unexplainable gap where Streamline HQ should have been a triumph. Recruiters, wary of the public controversy, quietly passed him over. The tech blog I had initially contacted even published a follow-up piece, delving deeper into the disqualification scandal and subtly hinting at Daniel's exaggerated claims. It was just enough to ensure his name remained tainted, He ended up taking a low-level analyst job at a company completely unrelated to tech or entrepreneurship, a safe, anonymous cubicle where his Harvard degree and visionary ideas were utterly irrelevant. I'd always imagined this moment as a joyous explosion of triumph, but the reality was more subtle, more insidious. It was the quiet, constant erosion of everything Daniel had been, everything my parents had lauded him for. It was a slow, agonizing death of a dream, played out in slow motion. He grew quieter, his once effervescent personality dimmed. The confident grin was replaced by a perpetual frown, his shoulders slumped. He avoided social gatherings knowing that the whispers would follow him, the curious glances, the unspoken questions about what happened. The one time we were at a family dinner, and Uncle Mike, oblivious as ever, brought up the innovation challenge. "So Daniel, whatever happened with that app of yours? Streamline something? Heard it didn't quite work out." Daniel flushed crimson. "It's complicated, Uncle Mike. We decided to go in a different direction." "Oh well, these things happen, right?" Uncle Mike said cheerfully, totally missing Daniel's distress. "Plenty of other fish in the sea, eh?" But for Daniel there weren't plenty of other fish. Not for the golden child who had been promised a golden pond. I watched him from across the table, taking a sip of water, a perfectly neutral expression on my face. My parents glanced at me, a flicker of something unreadable in their eyes. Perhaps a silent acknowledgement of my restraint, my calm composure compared to Daniel's visible discomfort. The most satisfying part was that Daniel had no idea, not a clue. He blamed the judges, the unfair system, his partners for not being supportive, bad luck. But he never, not once, suspected me. His little brother, the invisible one, the practical one. He still thought I was just Alex, the guy who worked in IT, the quiet one who never caused trouble. He still saw me through the lens of our shared past, incapable of imagining the depths of resentment I harbored. And that was the true genius of it. His downfall was his own. His reputation was ruined by his own inflated ego, exposed by his own technical ignorance and amplified by my carefully placed, undetectable nudges. I was the silent architect of his ruin, the ghost in his machine. And the best part? It was working. Daniel was unraveling day by day, piece by piece. And soon the day would come when he'd have to face the ultimate public humiliation. The awards night. He would be there, a hollow echo of his former self. And I would be there too, an unseen hand, watching the final act of my masterpiece unfold. 8 months after the Innovation Challenge, the annual National Innovation Awards were finally upon us. This was the pinnacle, the stage where Daniel had always envisioned himself. He had told me, years ago, that he would be walking that red carpet, accepting the Young Entrepreneur of the Year award. I remember his exact words. "It's not about the money, Alex. It's about the recognition. Being seen as someone who truly made a difference." The irony was a bitter, beautiful pill. Daniel wasn't nominated for anything. His former partners Marcus Chen and Sarah Williams were. Their relaunched company, Catalyst Solutions, had quietly secured seed funding and was nominated in the promising newcomer category. They had meticulously rebranded, built a new team, and severed all public ties with Daniel. But Daniel was there. Mom and Dad insisted. "It's important to support Marcus and Sarah," Mom had said, a subtle shift in allegiance. "And Daniel needs to see that life goes on. He needs to move forward." They still didn't understand. Moving forward was exactly what he couldn't do. Not when his past was a festering wound I had carefully cultivated. I arrived separately, dressed nondescriptly, blending into the background. My invitation came through a colleague in my IT department who had an extra ticket. I made sure to arrive after the main red carpet frenzy, avoiding any chance encounters with my family. The ballroom was opulent, filled with the glitterati of the tech world. Loud chatter, clinking glasses, the hum of ambition and success. Daniel, I spotted him near the back, by the bar, a solitary figure nursing a drink. He was wearing the same perfectly tailored suit he'd worn for the Innovation Challenge. It looked too big on him now, He'd lost weight, and his posture was perpetually slumped. He wasn't glowing, he wasn't charming the room, he was just existing. He saw Mom and Dad, who were excitedly chatting with some mutual acquaintances near the entrance. They looked proud, but their pride wasn't for Daniel. It was for Marcus and Sarah, whose faces were now plastered on the big screens above the stage nominated for their award. The ceremony began. Categories were announced, speeches were made, awards were handed out. Each success was a fresh stab for Daniel, a reminder of what he had lost. When the promising newcomer category was announced, my heart gave a little thrill. Marcus and Sarah's faces flashed on the screen. Daniel flinched, almost imperceptibly, and then turned away. And the award goes to Catalyst Solutions. A roar of applause. Marcus and Sarah walked confidently to the stage, their faces beaming. They looked like winners, like the future, the people Daniel was supposed to be. Their acceptance speech was gracious, thanking their team, their investors, and making a point to acknowledge the challenges and lessons learned along the way. It was a subtle, dignified dig at Daniel, a public declaration that they had moved past his misstep. Daniel took a long gulp of his drink. He didn't applaud. I watched him, watched the way his shoulders tightened, the way his jaw clenched. He was reliving the humiliation. He was watching his own funeral, played out in front of the very people he had wanted to impress, and he never knew why. That was the key. He never knew that the technical misunderstanding, the unforeseen circumstances, the miscommunication about roles, it was all a carefully constructed lie. A single, perfectly placed domino that had knocked down his entire life. He attributed it to fate, to a momentary lapse, to a harsh judgment. He hadn't spiraled into paranoia, hadn't suspected a malicious hand. He was too inherently trusting, too self-absorbed in his own brilliance, to imagine such a deliberate act of sabotage. He genuinely believed that his talent was enough to overcome anything, and so when it wasn't, the only explanation he could conceive of was that the world had simply been unfair. He never suspected that his own brother, the quiet, ignored one, had spent years perfecting the art of unnoticed observation. He never suspected that while he was collecting accolades, I was collecting weaknesses. He never suspected that my practical skills extended to the far more intricate and devastating art of psychological warfare. And he never, ever suspected the depth of my resentment. He was oblivious to the fact that every time he was praised, every time I was overlooked, every time our parents beamed with pride at his achievements and merely offered a polite, "That's nice for mine," I was building this moment, this precise, agonizing moment of his public defeat. The bitterness had curdled into a cold, hard resolve years ago. It wasn't about love or hate or even justice. It was about proving a point, proving that the golden child was just as fragile as anyone else, that his perceived perfection was merely a construct and easily shattered. I saw Mom and Dad approach Daniel, their faces etched with a mixture of concern and pity. They put their arms around him, whispered words of encouragement. But it wasn't the same. It was no longer admiration. It was comfort for the fallen. He was no longer their bright, shining star. He was just their son, bruised and broken. And I, the invisible brother, the architect of his fall, stood in the shadows, sipping a glass of water, watching my masterpiece. There was no sudden rush of adrenaline, no triumphant roar, just a profound, quiet sense of peace. The kind of peace that comes from a deep, festering wound finally being healed, even if the healing process involved a deliberate, calculated act of destruction. For 28 years, I had lived in Daniel's shadow. For 28 years, I had carried the weight of their indifference, the sting of his effortless superiority. And now, for the first time, I felt truly free. Free from the envy. Free from the constant comparison. Free from the crushing burden of being less than. Because now, he was less than. And I was finally me. Unburdened. And he never knew why. 6 months after Daniel's public destruction, I was sitting in my corner office at Morrison Tech. Yes, I'd renamed the company, when my assistant buzzed in. "Mr. Morrison, your brother is here to see you." I hadn't seen Daniel since that night at the conference, the night I watched 28 years of Golden Child mythology crumble in real time. Part of me wondered if he'd figured it out. Part of me hoped he had. "Send him in." Daniel walked through my door looking like a ghost of himself. The confident posture was gone, replaced by hunched shoulders and hollow eyes. His hair was longer, unkempt. The designer clothes had been swapped for jeans and a wrinkled button-down. "Alex," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Daniel." I gestured. "To the chair across from my desk. Please sit." He sat down heavily, like the weight of the world was pressing down on him. For a moment, we just stared at each other across the mahogany desk that used to be his. "I know it was you," he said finally. There it was. The moment I'd been both dreading and anticipating for months. "I'm sorry. What was me?" "The leak. The documents. The insider information that destroyed my company." His eyes met mine, and for the first time in our lives I saw fear there. "It was you." I leaned back in my chair, studying his face. "That's quite an accusation, Daniel. Do you have any proof?" "I don't need proof. I know you." He laughed bitterly. "God, how did I never see it before? The way you watched me, the way you remembered everything. You were cataloging it all, weren't you? Every achievement, every moment of praise, every time Mom and Dad chose me over you." I said nothing, but my silence was answer enough. "Why?" The word came out broken, desperate. "Why would you destroy everything I built?" For 28 years I'd imagined this conversation. I'd rehearsed different versions in my head, crafted perfect speeches about justice and karma and evening. The scales. But now sitting across from my broken brother, only one truth mattered. "Because you never saw me." Daniel's face crumpled. "What do you mean? Of course I saw you. You're my brother." "No, Daniel. I was your shadow. Your backup. The spare child who existed to make you look better by comparison." I stood up, walking to the window that overlooked the city. "Do you remember my 8th birthday? Your..." "What?" "My 8th birthday, November 15th. You spent the entire dinner playing games on Dad's phone because you were bored." Daniel was quiet for a long moment. I don't remember." "Of course you don't. Do you remember when I won the state science fair in 10th grade? Another pause. "No." "When I made varsity basketball as a sophomore?" "Alex, when I graduated summa cum laude from state, when I got my first job, when I bought my first house." I turned back to face him. "Do you remember any of it?" The look on his face told me everything I needed to know. "But I remember everything about you," I continued. "Every trophy, every award, every moment Mom and Dad looked at you like you were the second coming. I remember because while you were living your golden life, I was invisible." "I didn't know," Daniel whispered. "I swear to God, Alex, I didn't know you felt that way. That's the problem, isn't it? You didn't know because you never bothered to look. None of you did." I sat back down, leaning forward across the desk. "Do you want to know the real irony? I didn't set out to destroy you. I just wanted to succeed. But when I started digging into your company for competitive intelligence, I found all those irregularities, all those shortcuts, all those lies." Daniel's hands were shaking now. "So you decided to use them against me." I decided to level the playing field. For the first time in our lives, we were competing on equal terms. And you know what I discovered? Without Mom and Dad propping you up, without the Golden Child mythology protecting you, you're just ordinary. The word hit him like a physical blow. I could see it in the way his shoulders sagged, the way his breath caught. The insider trading, the embezzlement, the falsified reports. That was all you, Daniel. I just made sure the right people found out about it. I leaned back in my chair. I gave you the same scrutiny you would have faced if you'd been anyone else, if you'd been me. You destroyed my life, he said, his voice barely audible. No. You destroyed your own life. I just stopped protecting you from the consequences. We sat in silence for several minutes. Outside, the city hummed with life. People, going about their days, unaware of the reckoning happening in this office. What happens now? Daniel asked finally. Now? Now you figure out who you are when you're not the golden child. When you're not special. When you're just... Daniel. I stood up, walking to the door. It's actually liberating once you get used to it. Daniel stood too, moving slowly like an old man. At the door, he turned back to me. I'm sorry, he said, for all of it, for not seeing you, for taking everything for granted, for being the reason you felt invisible. It was the first genuine apology I'd ever received from him. 28 years too late, but genuine nonetheless. I know, I said. But sorry doesn't give me back my childhood. Sorry doesn't erase 28 years of being second best. He nodded, understanding that this was as close to forgiveness as he was going to get. For what it's worth, he said, you were never second best. You were just overlooked. And that's on us. Not you. After he left, I sat alone in my office, staring out at the city I now commanded from the top floor of the building that used to be his. The satisfaction I'd expected to feel was muted, replaced by something more complex. I had won. I had finally, definitively, completely won. So why did victory taste so much like ash? 3 months after Daniel's visit, Mom called. I was in the middle of a board meeting when my assistant slipped me a note. Your mother says it's urgent. I excused myself and took the call in my private office. Alex, honey, we need to talk. Her voice was different, strained. The cheerful, dismissive tone I'd grown up with was gone, replaced by something raw and desperate. What's wrong, Mom? It's Daniel, he's in the hospital. The words hit me like ice water. What happened? He tried to... She couldn't finish the sentence. The doctors say he's stable now, but Alex, he left a note. And it mentioned you. I was on the highway 20 minutes later, driving toward the hospital where my brother was recovering from a suicide attempt. The brother I'd systematically destroyed. The brother whose life I'd dismantled piece by piece until there was nothing left. The hospital smelled like disinfectant and despair. Mom and Dad were in the waiting room looking older than I'd ever seen them. Mom's eyes were red and swollen. Dad's hands shook as he held his coffee cup. Where is he? I asked. Room 314, Dad said without looking up. They're only allowing family for short visits. I walked down the sterile hallway, my footsteps echoing off the linoleum. Room 314. I stood outside the door for a full minute before I could bring myself to knock. Come in. Daniel was propped up in bed, his wrists bandaged, an IV drip attached to his arm. He looked up when I entered, and I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before. Complete and utter defeat. You came? He said. Of course I came. You're my brother. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. Am I? After everything that's happened, are we still brothers? I pulled a chair up to his bed. What did the note say? You really want to know? I nodded. Daniel closed his eyes. I wrote that I finally understood what it felt like to be invisible, to be overlooked, to be the disappointment. He opened his eyes and looked directly at me. I wrote that I was sorry for stealing your childhood, and that maybe now, with me gone, you could finally be seen. The words were a knife to my chest. This wasn't supposed to happen. I wanted him to fall, not this. Daniel, do you know what the worst part is? He continued. It's not losing the company. It's not the public humiliation or the criminal charges or even the fact that I'll probably go to prison. It's knowing that I spent 28 years being everything you wanted to be, and I never once thought about what that was doing to you. I stared at him, this broken version of my golden brother, and felt something crack inside my chest. I Remember your 8th birthday? He said suddenly. What? Your 8th birthday, November 15th. You asked Mom if you could have a party like mine, and she said maybe something smaller. You looked so disappointed, but you didn't cry. You just nodded and said, okay. His voice was getting quieter. I was playing games on Dad's phone during dinner because I was thinking about my new bike. I didn't even sing happy birthday. I couldn't speak. And the science fair. I remember now. You won first place with that volcano project, and you were so excited to tell us. But I had debate practice, and Mom was helping me prepare for regionals. We barely acknowledged it. Daniel, stop. The basketball team. Your graduation. Your first job. I remember them now, Alex. I remember all of it. And I remember how we treated each of those moments like they didn't matter because they weren't about me. Tears were streaming down my face now, and I couldn't make them stop. I destroyed you, I whispered. No, Daniel said firmly. We destroyed each other. I destroyed you first. Slowly. Over 28 years. You just did it faster. We sat, in silence, two brothers who had spent their entire lives on opposite sides of an invisible war, finally seeing each other clearly. I don't know how to fix this, I said. Maybe you can't. Maybe some things are too broken to fix. Daniel reached over and took my hand with his unbandaged one. But maybe we can start over. Maybe we can figure out how to be brothers instead of competitors. How? I don't know. But I'd like to try, if you're willing. I looked at this man who had been my tormentor and my obsession, my rival and my motivation for nearly 3 decades. The golden child who had finally tarnished. The perfect son who had finally fallen. And for the first time in my life, I saw him as just Daniel. Flawed, broken, human Daniel. I'd like that too, I said. 5 years after Daniel walked into my office that day, I'm sitting in the same chair, but everything else has changed. Morrison. Tech isn't just my company anymore, it's ours. The nameplate on my door reads Alex Morrison, co-CEO, and down the hall Daniel's reads the same. We rebuilt it together, brick by brick, decision by decision, argument by argument. It wasn't easy. God, it wasn't easy. The first year was hell. Daniel would look at me sometimes with this expression I couldn't quite read. Not anger, not hurt, but something deeper. Like he was seeing me for the first time and trying to reconcile the brother he thought he knew with the person who had systematically destroyed his life. I keep thinking about all the times you helped me, he said. One night when we were working late, debugging code for our new platform. All the times you listened to me complain about work, about investors, about the pressure. You knew exactly what I was going through because you were the one putting me through it. I stopped typing. Does that make it worse? I don't know, he said quietly. Sometimes I think it makes it more human somehow. You weren't some faceless enemy. You were my brother, hurting in a way I never saw. That conversation haunted me for weeks, but we kept working. We kept building. And slowly something remarkable happened. We became actual partners. Not the golden child and his shadow, but two equals building something together. The company thrived. Our revolutionary AI platform for small businesses launched to massive success. We were featured on magazine covers, both of us side by side. The Morrison brothers. From rivalry to partnership. Mom framed that one. Speaking of Mom and Dad, that was its own journey. It took them almost 2 years to really understand what had happened. Not just the sabotage, but the deeper truth. How their favoritism had poisoned our relationship from childhood. How their unconscious preferences had created the very monster that nearly destroyed their golden child. We failed you, Dad said to me one Sunday dinner about 3 years ago. We failed both of you, but especially you. We made you feel invisible in your own family. Mom cried. Actually cried. I thought we were just celebrating Daniel's achievements. I didn't realize we were making you feel less than. You weren't making me feel less than, I told them. I was less than. In your eyes and everyone's eyes. Daniel was the sun and I was background noise. That was our failure. Not yours, Mom said. You were never background noise. You were our son. You deserved the same love, the same attention, the same pride. It was too little, too late in some ways. You can't undo 28 years of emotional neglect with an apology. But it was something. It was a start. Daniel and I went to therapy. Together. Family therapy, they called it, though it felt more like archaeological excavation, digging through layers of resentment, hurt, and misunderstanding to find something salvageable underneath. Alex spent his entire childhood believing he wasn't good enough. Our therapist, Dr. Chen, explained to Daniel during one particularly brutal session. Every achievement of yours felt like evidence of his inadequacy. Every praise you received felt like criticism of him. But that's not... I never wanted that, Daniel said, looking stricken. I tried to include him. I tried to help him. From a position of superiority, Dr. Chen said gently, you were always the successful one helping, the struggling one. Even your kindness reinforced the hierarchy. That session broke something open in both of us. Daniel finally understood why his attempts to help had felt like salt in the wound. I finally understood that his success hadn't been a deliberate attack on my worth. We started over. Not as the golden child and the spare, but as two adults trying to build something better than what we'd inherited. The business grew. We hired employees who became like family. We created a company culture based on equality, on recognizing everyone's contributions. It was our way of healing the wounds our own family had created. Last month, we won the National Business Innovation Award, the same award Daniel had lost 5 years ago. We accepted it together, and when they asked us to speak, Daniel stepped back and gestured for me to take the microphone first. 5 years ago, I thought success meant being better than someone else, I told the audience. I thought winning meant someone else had to lose. I was wrong. Real success is building something together that neither of you could have created alone. Daniel spoke after me, and his words still echo in my mind. My brother taught me that sometimes the people who hurt us the most are the ones who need our love the most. And sometimes the greatest victory is choosing forgiveness over revenge. The audience gave us a standing ovation, but all I could think about was 7-year-old me, sitting on those porch steps, feeling invisible and forgotten. That little boy could never have imagined this moment, standing on stage with his brother, not as his shadow but as his equal. After the ceremony, we went for drinks, just the two of us, like we used to do before everything went wrong. Do you ever regret it? Daniel asked, swirling his whiskey. The sabotage, I mean. Do you ever wish you'd handled things differently? I thought about it for a long moment. I regret the pain I caused you. I regret the years we lost. But do I regret that it led us here? To this partnership, this understanding, this brotherhood? No, I don't regret that. He nodded slowly. I used to think you destroyed my life. Now I think maybe you saved it. The old me was so focused on individual achievement, on being the best, that I was missing the point entirely. This, what we've built together, is so much better than anything I could have accomplished alone. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the city lights twinkle below us. You know what's funny? I said eventually. I spent so many years wanting to be you, wanting your life, your success, your place in the family. And now, I wouldn't trade places with anyone. This life, our partnership, the work we're doing together, it's better than any fantasy I ever had about being the golden child. Daniel smiled. Maybe that's the real victory. Not beating each other, but becoming ourselves. As I write this, 5 years after my confession, I realize that revenge was never really what I wanted. What I wanted was to matter, to be seen, to be valued, and now I am. Not because I destroyed my brother, but because we destroyed the toxic dynamic that had defined us for so long. We built something new from the ashes of our childhood rivalry. The golden child and the spare no longer exist. There are just two brothers working side by side, building something beautiful together. And that, I've learned, is the only victory that actually matters.